Officer, I am a federal magistrate judge. My identification is in my front pocket.
Shut up! You don't look like any judge I've ever seen. You're probably out here using a stolen card.
My name is on the card in that machine, officer.
I don't care what lies you practice. Turn around before I put you on the ground.
Judge Richardson pressed her thumb against the ATM's cold glass screen, selecting the $200 withdrawal option with practiced efficiency as her breath formed faint clouds in the early Ohio morning. The Chase Bank branch on High Street stood silent at 6:47 a.m., its parking lot empty except for her silver Lexus SUV idling nearby with 12-year-old Maya Richardson tapping her fingers against the passenger window. She had 10 minutes to get home, pack lunches, and deliver Maya to the school bus for the museum field trip, a timeline that felt luxurious compared to her usual federal court docket. The machine chirped its compliance, spitting out 2 crisp bills that she folded into her hoodie pocket alongside the crumpled permission slip. Maya's voice cut through the quiet, high and impatient, as she leaned her head out the window. "Mom, the bus comes at 7:15, and you promised we'd stop for donuts," she said, her words trailing into a yawn that reminded Judge Richardson of her own exhaustion after yesterday's late sentencing hearing. The judge smiled despite the time pressure, tucking the cash deeper into her pocket as she turned toward the car, her federal badge wallet momentarily visible against the gray fabric. She took 3 steps across the asphalt before the first police cruiser fish-tailed into the lot, its siren emitting a single whoop that shattered the morning's fragile peace. Officer Kyle Bremer's body remained rigid behind the steering wheel, his eyes narrowing as he radioed dispatch with one hand while studying the scene through his windshield. Unit 4732, visual on suspicious person at Chase ATM, High Street location, black female attempting to leave after transaction, he said, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone who had already decided what he was witnessing. He watched Judge Richardson's casual workout attire, yoga pants, hoodie, running shoes, and mentally cataloged it against his profile of what a judge should look like, which involved robes, suits, and white skin. His hand dropped to his duty belt, fingers tracing the Glock's grip as he prepared to exit the vehicle. Judge Richardson froze mid-step, her legal training instantly recognizing the tactical positioning of Bremer's cruiser angled to block her vehicle's exit path. She calculated the distance to her car door, the time it would take to reach Maya, and the legal basis for this stop, her mind running through Fourth Amendment case law with the same precision she used to draft search warrants. "Maya, lock the doors and stay inside," she called, her voice maintaining the measured courtroom tone that had commanded respect from attorneys and defendants alike for 23 years. The ATM's security camera recorded her turning slowly toward the approaching officer, her hands already raised to shoulder height, in a gesture of compliance that felt both instinctive and infuriating. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know where you are watching from. Bremer's boots hit the pavement with a heavy thud that echoed across the empty parking lot, his body adopting a bladed stance that emphasized his dominant shooting position. He had responded to 3 similar calls in the past 18 months, each resulting in citations for loitering or trespassing that his supervisors had praised as proactive community policing, though all 3 complainants had been black residents conducting legitimate business. His body cam, clipped to his chest, remained dark, a policy violation he justified internally by telling himself he needed to assess the threat before activating the record function. The department's lax enforcement of the 4-minute activation gap had trained him that accountability was optional when discretion felt more urgent. Judge Richardson's eyes tracked Bremer's approach, noting the drawn firearm held low and ready, a position that violated use of force protocols for a nonviolent suspicious person call. She had presided over 14 civil rights cases involving police misconduct in her tenure had admonished officers from this very department for similar aggressive approaches and now found herself experiencing the same terror her litigants had described in sworn testimony. "Officer, I am a federal magistrate judge," she said, her voice projecting calm authority as she slowly lifted her badge wallet with 2 fingers. "My identification is in my front pocket, and my daughter is in the vehicle behind me." Bremer's jaw tightened at the word judge, his grip on the Glock unconsciously firming as his bias interpreted her statement as deception rather than de-escalation. "Stop reaching for shit," he barked, the command sharp and devoid of the courtesy he extended to white citizens during traffic stops. His training told him to control the scene, to establish dominance, to never let a suspect dictate terms, and his prejudice told him that this woman in casual clothes could not possibly hold the credentials she claimed. The distance between them closed to 12 feet, close enough for him to see her face clearly, yet he saw only what his preconceptions allowed. Maya Richardson's small hands pressed against the SUV's window glass, her phone clutched in one fist as she recorded the scene with trembling fingers, instinctively understanding that this moment required documentation. She had sat through enough dinner-table conversations about her mother's work to recognize when authority was being abused, though she had never imagined watching that abuse directed at the woman who packed her lunches and checked her homework. "Mom," she whispered, the word fogging the window before her, her thumb hovering over the record button that would eventually become Exhibit A in federal court. The ATM's clock ticked to 6:49 a.m., marking the moment. A routine morning became a civil rights violation. "Turn around, place your hands on the ATM," Bremer ordered, his voice adopting the robotic cadence of someone reciting training scripts while ignoring their spirit. Judge Richardson complied, her palms flat against the machine's cold metal, the $200 still crumpled in her hoodie pocket alongside the permission slip that suddenly seemed trivial. She felt the handcuffs before she saw them, the steel biting into her wrists with a finality that made her federal authority feel meaningless in this parking lot. "Officer, you are making a mistake," she said, turning her head to maintain eye contact, her judicial tone never wavering despite the indignity of her position. Bremer ignored her, radioing dispatch with a narrative he was already constructing to justify his actions. "Subject claims to be federal judge, but no credentials visible, using suspected fraudulent card non-compliant," he said into his shoulder mic, each word a deliberate falsehood that would later be contradicted by surveillance footage. His body cam finally blinked to life at 6:51 a.m., capturing only his version of events after the critical first 4 minutes of escalation were lost to a strategic delay. The policy violation would become a cornerstone of the lawsuit, but in that moment, Bremer felt only the righteous certainty of someone who believed he was protecting the community from a threat that existed entirely in his own biased perception. Judge Richardson's mind raced through legal options as the cuffs tightened, calculating the point at which compliance became complicity and wondering if her daughter understood why this was happening. She had spent 2 decades ensuring justice was blind, but now faced the stark reality that blindness in America often meant willful ignorance of racial bias. "My driver's license is in my pocket, my badge is in my wallet. My name is on the ATM card you claim is fraudulent," she recited, each fact delivered with the clarity she used when instructing juries. Bremer's response was to tighten his grip on her shoulder, spinning her toward his cruiser with a force that left bruises documented in her medical records. The Lexus's horn blared once, a desperate sound from Maya's small hand that made both adults turn toward the vehicle. Judge Richardson's eyes met her daughter's through the windshield, seeing the confusion and fear that would later require months of therapy to process, the cost of which would be itemized in the lawsuit's damages. "Maya, it's okay, stay in the car," she called, her voice finally cracking with the maternal fear she had suppressed while maintaining her professional composure. Bremer's lip curled at the exchange, interpreting a mother's reassurance to her child as further evidence of suspicious behavior. His bias, a filter that transformed every action into justification for his aggression. Bremer's partner, Officer Daniels, arrived at 6:55 a.m., his cruiser skidding to a halt behind the Lexus, lights painting the scene in frantic red and blue. He approached with his weapon holstered, his posture immediately less aggressive than Bremer's, his eyes widening as he recognized the federal badge now visible in Judge Richardson's restrained hands. "Kyle, that's a real federal badge," he said quietly, his voice carrying the uncertainty of someone who understood the legal implications of detaining a magistrate judge. Bremer waved him off, his certainty unshaken by his partner's observation, his narrative already too fixed to allow contradictory evidence. Judge Richardson stood motionless beside the cruiser, her cuffed hands held at waist level, the steel bracelets glinting in the morning light that now felt too bright, too exposing. She had presided over sentencing hearings where she explained to defendants that their rights had been violated, but standing on the other side of that equation reduced her legal knowledge to mere words that Bremer refused to hear. "Officer Daniels, I am Federal Magistrate Judge Amina Richardson. I have committed no crime, and I am being unlawfully detained," she said, directing her statement toward the more reasonable officer while maintaining eye contact with Bremer. The use of his partner's name seemed to enrage Bremer further, his face flushing at the implication that she had sized up the scene and found him wanting. Daniels stepped closer, his hand moving toward his radio as he requested dispatch verify her credentials through the federal database, a process that would take 11 minutes but would ultimately confirm what Judge Richardson had been stating since the encounter began. Bremer paced behind her, his boots crunching on loose gravel, his muttered comments captured by his now active body cam despite his attempt to keep them private. "I don't care what that badge says. You don't look like any judge I've ever seen," he grumbled, the words that would become headline news slipping out in a moment of unguarded prejudice. Judge Richardson's spine straightened at the comment, the insult cutting deeper than the handcuffs because it revealed the immutable standard she could never meet. Maya emerged from the SUV despite her mother's instructions, her phone held before her like a shield as she recorded the scene from the sidewalk, her small voice surprisingly steady. "My mom is a judge. She didn't do anything wrong, and I'm recording everything," she announced, her words echoing her mother's courtroom cadence, a genetic inheritance of authority that Bremer interpreted as defiance. "Get back in the vehicle," he screamed, his voice losing its professional veneer as he pointed a finger at the child, his aggression now directed at both mother and daughter. Judge Richardson's calm finally shattered, her maternal instinct overriding her judicial composure as she stepped between Bremer and Maya, the movement causing the handcuffs to bite deeper into her wrists. The federal verification came back at 7:08 a.m., dispatch's voice crackling through both officers' radios with the confirmation that Judge Amina Richardson was indeed a magistrate judge with 23 years of service, her credentials beyond reproach. Daniels's shoulders sagged with relief, while Bremer's jaw tightened, his mind racing to justify the 23 minutes of detention that had already elapsed, the policy violation stacking like evidence in a case he was losing in real time. Judge Richardson stood silent, her eyes fixed on Bremer, waiting for the apology that never came, the acknowledgement of error that departmental culture had trained him never to offer. The handcuffs remained on her wrists for another 90 seconds, each second a deliberate delay that would be cited in the lawsuit as evidence of intentional infliction of emotional distress. Bremer finally unlocked the cuffs, his movements brusque, his eyes avoiding hers as he mumbled, "You're free to go," the words emerging as a concession rather than an exoneration. No apology followed, no explanation for the detention, no acknowledgement that her rights had been violated by every measure of constitutional law she had sworn to uphold. Judge Richardson rubbed her wrists, the red marks already darkening into bruises that would be photographed for her medical examination later that afternoon, the physical evidence of his aggression documented with the same precision she applied to evidence in her courtroom. She collected her badge wallet from where it had fallen during the cuffing, the leather scuffed from the asphalt, another piece of evidence in the case she would build against him. Her daughter's hand found hers as they walked back to the Lexus, Maya's small fingers interlacing with her mother's, the gesture both protective and seeking protection. "Mom, why did he do that?" the girl asked, her voice small and broken, the question that would haunt their family dinners for months to come, that would require a child psychologist to unpack, that would be quantified in the lawsuit's damages as therapy costs and emotional suffering. Judge Richardson had no answer that would make sense to a 12-year-old, no way to explain that her mother's federal authority meant nothing against the presumption of her criminality. "Sometimes people see what they want to see," she said, the explanation inadequate but true, her words carrying the weight of every civil rights case she had ever presided over. Bremer watched them drive away, his cruiser still angled across the parking lot, his body cam capturing his final comment to Daniels. "Probably some affirmative action higher anyway," he said, the prejudice that had driven the entire encounter laid bare in a single phrase that would become the lawsuit's smoking gun. Daniel said nothing, his silence a complicity that would later cost him his job, his pension, his reputation. Judge Richardson's Lexus disappeared around the corner, its taillights fading into morning traffic, but the damage Bremer had inflicted would ripple outward, a stone thrown into the calm waters of her life that would create waves reaching the highest levels of federal oversight. Judge Richardson drove home on autopilot, her hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, her knuckles white against the leather, her daughter's silence filling the car like a physical presence. Maya stared at her phone, the recording she had made already, auto-uploading to the cloud, the digital evidence preserved before Bremer could demand its deletion, her tech savvy saving the case. They pulled into their driveway at 7:30 a.m., the field trip departure time come and gone, the permission slip in Judge Richardson's pocket now meaningless compared to the violation they had both witnessed. She called the school first, her voice robotic as she explained Maya would be absent, the words "family emergency" tasting like ash in her mouth. Her next call was to David Chen, her former law clerk turned civil rights attorney, his number dialed from memory despite the tremor in her fingers. "David, I need you to file a complaint against the Columbus Police Department, officer number 4732, for unlawful detention, excessive force, and civil rights violations," she said, her judicial tone returning as she shifted into legal strategy mode, the familiar process of building a case replacing the shock of having been a victim. Chen's silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds, his mind processing the fact that his mentor, the woman who had taught him constitutional law, had become a plaintiff in the very type of case they had prosecuted together. "Judge, I'm on my way to your office. We'll file by end of business," he replied, his voice carrying the same measured fury she felt building in her chest. Judge Richardson's chambers on the 6th floor of the federal courthouse became a war room by 9 a.m., her clerks pulling files on Officer Bremer's 3 prior complaints, her IT specialist securing Maya's cloud upload, her staff photographer documenting the bruises on her wrists with the same precision they used for evidence photos in drug trials. The Columbus Police Department's initial statement hit the news wire at 10:15 a.m., a masterpiece of passive voice and institutional defense. Officer responded to suspicious person call, took appropriate action to ensure community safety. Subject was released without charges. The statement's omission of her judicial status, of the handcuffs, of the 23 minutes, of the false accusations, read to her like a confession of guilt rather than a defense of conduct. She forwarded it to Chen with a single annotation, Exhibit A in our defamation claim. By noon, she had drafted her own 13-page complaint, her legal prose sharper than usual, each paragraph a scalpel cutting through the department's narrative to expose the bias at its core. She detailed the Fourth Amendment violations, the equal protection failures, the policy breaches, the emotional distress, the constitutional torts, her words building a case so airtight it would cost the city millions. Maya sat in the corner of her office, a child psychologist already en route. The girl's drawings of the scene showing a stick figure with a badge pointing a gun at a stick figure with a judicial robe, the crayon colors dark and angry. Judge Richardson signed the complaint at 12:47 p.m., exactly 6 hours after the ATM transaction. Her signature, the same one that had authorized thousands of search warrants, now authorizing her own pursuit of justice. The department's internal affairs investigation began 48 hours later, a formality that Judge Richardson knew would end in dismissal, given Bremer's 3 prior complaints had all been cleared by the same unit. She refused to participate in their process, instead directing all inquiries to Chen, who responded with a federal court summons that elevated the matter beyond their capacity for self-protection. The body cam footage, when finally released through the lawsuit's discovery demands, showed the 4-minute gap in activation, the aggressive approach, the drawn weapon, the dismissive comments, each frame a nail in the city's coffin. The ATM surveillance video, obtained via subpoena, clearly displayed her name on the card, her calm demeanor, her compliance, the truth undeniable in black and white. Media coverage exploded when the Columbus Dispatch ran the story with the headline, "Federal Judge Handcuffed at ATM, Officer Says She Doesn't Look Like a Judge." The quote going viral within hours. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News all picked up the story, the body cam audio playing on loop, Bremer's voice becoming synonymous with systemic bias in American policing. Judge Richardson declined all interview requests, issuing a single statement through Chen, "This is not about me. This is about every black American who faces the presumption of criminality regardless of their accomplishments." The statement was retweeted 300,000 times, shared by celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens who saw in her ordeal their own fears made manifest. The city council called an emergency session, Chief Patricia Walters defending her officer for 20 minutes before a council member played the body cam audio through the chamber's speakers. Bremer's words echoing off the marble walls as elected officials shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I don't care what that badge says. You don't look like any judge I've ever seen," the recording repeated, the phrase that would cost the city $8.5 million, that would end careers, that would force policy changes written in the blood and bruises of black citizens. Chief Walters' face paled as she realized her department's initial statement had committed them to a narrative the footage would not support, her command staff already drafting her resignation letter in their minds. The council voted unanimously to settle, to implement reforms, to admit what the footage made undeniable. The settlement negotiations took 6 weeks, Chen rejecting the city's initial $2 million offer with a laugh that carried no humor, his counter-demand of 11 unmelters based on detailed calculations of damages, therapy costs, lost wages, punitive damages, and the constitutional violations that judges took personally. Judge Richardson sat through the mediation sessions, her judicial demeanor never cracking, her presence a reminder that the woman Bremer had handcuffed was the same woman who could have signed the search warrant for his own misconduct investigation. The city's attorneys flinched when she entered the room, their usual bravado deflated by the reality that their opponent understood their playbook better than they did. They settled at $8.5 million, the largest payout in Columbus history for a civil rights violation. The check delivered with a formal apology read by the mayor at a press conference Maya refused to attend. The department's policy changes came fast and comprehensive, mandated by the settlement agreement, rather than any internal recognition of failure. Body cam activation became automatic upon cruiser exit, the 4-minute gap eliminated by technology that removed officer discretion. Bias training became quarterly and mandatory, taught by federal judges and civil rights attorneys who understood the law's application in ways street cops never had. Officer Bremer was terminated, his dismissal citing not the racism that had driven the encounter but the policy violations that made the racism provable, the department protecting itself by sacrificing the individual. His 3 prior complaints were reopened. The dismissed cases now seen as patterns of misconduct that internal affairs had enabled rather than corrected. Judge Richardson donated her entire settlement to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Central Ohio Community Foundation, earmarking specifically for police accountability initiatives and youth counseling programs for children who had witnessed police violence. She kept only the amount required for Maya's therapy, the weekly sessions already showing progress as the girl learned to separate her mother's authority from the officer's abuse of power. The permission slip from that morning remained in her desk drawer, a reminder of what should have been an ordinary day, now preserved as Exhibit B in the emotional damages portion of their case. She testified before Congress 3 months later, her statement read into the record as she sat behind the same bench where she had sentenced defendants for crimes less damaging than what had been done to her. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court as part of the settlement revealed what Judge Richardson had not allowed herself to acknowledge. She had been traumatized, her sense of safety in public spaces shattered, her judicial authority undermined by the memory of handcuffs and disrespect. The therapist's report detailed nightmares, hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, and a persistent feeling of vulnerability that no federal badge could protect against, the symptoms mirroring those of crime victims she had seen testify in her courtroom. Maya's evaluation showed similar trauma markers. The child who had witnessed her mother's dehumanization now flinching at police sirens, drawing pictures of guns pointed at her family needing nightlights at age 12. The reports became part of the public record, the clinical language translating their pain into damages the city could quantify and pay for, but never truly repair. Officer Bremer's deposition was a master class in deflection, his attorney coaching him to admit no bias, to claim he had acted on the suspicious person call, to suggest that any officer would have done the same. Chen played the body cam footage frame by frame, asking questions that exposed each lie. Here you say she was reaching for something, but the video shows her hands were raised. Here you claim she was aggressive, but your own audio captures her measured tone. Here you state she didn't show credentials, but the timestamp proves you waited 4 minutes to activate your camera. By the end of the 7-hour deposition, Bremer had contradicted himself 23 times, each contradiction a separate count in the complaint, his testimony a gift to their case that required no embellishment. The department's internal affairs files, subpoenaed during discovery, revealed what Judge Richardson had suspected. Bremer's 3 prior complaints were nearly identical. Black citizens detained for suspicious behavior in affluent neighborhoods, handcuffed, questioned, released without charges. The complaints dismissed by a review board that never saw body cam footage because Bremer had never activated his camera in those cases either. The pattern was so clear that the city's own attorneys recommended settlement rather than risk a jury seeing the systemic enablement of racial profiling. The department's complicity in his misconduct laid bare in their own paperwork. Chief Walters resigned the day after the files were made public, her tenure ending in disgrace, not for Bremer's actions but for the department's failure to stop him. The institutional protection racket collapsing under its own weight. The new chief, a black woman promoted from internal affairs, promised reform, but Judge Richardson knew promises meant nothing without the power of the judiciary to enforce them. The final therapy session for Maya occurred 18 months after the ATM encounter, the girl now 14, her drawings showing police officers as stick figures with question marks instead of badges. Her progress measured in her ability to walk past a cruiser without flinching. Judge Richardson's own therapy continued, the Federal Employee Assistance Program covering sessions where she processed the unique trauma of being both a victim of the system and an administrator of it, the cognitive dissonance requiring professional navigation. The 8.5 million had long since been distributed, the NLCP using their portion to fund a police accountability clinic named for her, the irony that she could not attend its opening because her judicial ethics required she remain impartial in future civil rights cases. Maya's permission slip from that morning was framed and hung in the clinic's lobby, a symbol of ordinary plans destroyed by extraordinary prejudice. Officer Bremer's appeal of his termination was denied by the State Civil Service Commission, his argument that he had followed departmental policy rejected because the policy itself had been ruled unconstitutional in the settlement agreement. He found work as a security guard at a warehouse complex, his law enforcement career ending not with a bang, but with a lawsuit. His name synonymous with racial profiling in police training academies statewide, his body cam footage required viewing for recruits learning what not to do. His 3 prior complainants filed a class action suit using his deposition as precedent, their cases resurrected by the evidence Judge Richardson's ordeal had uncovered, the stone she had thrown creating waves that reached backward in time to correct past injustices. The department's new body cam policy, automatic activation, and bias training were all attributed to her case, her pain converted into progress she would have rather avoided. Judge Richardson returned to her courtroom the Monday after the settlement was finalized, her first case involving a police search warrant that she denied based on insufficient probable cause, her written opinion citing her own experience as a reminder that presumptions of criminality must be supported by facts, not bias. The officer who had requested the warrant left her chambers quietly, understanding that this judge would no longer grant the benefit of doubt to law enforcement, her judicial scrutiny forever sharpened by the handcuffs she had worn in that parking lot. Maya attended her first day of high school that fall, her mother's federal badge no longer hidden in a hoodie pocket, but displayed proudly on her keychain, the symbol of authority that had been disrespected, now reclaimed as family armor. The presumption of criminality remained a reality for Black Americans, but in Columbus, Ohio, it now came with a price tag of $8.50 in a federal judge's memory of what justice required when authority failed.